Hi and welcome back to the channel. If you hear any strange noises during this video, it's because I'm sharing the space with a very small kitten who is prone to make strange noises. Today's movie is Hivaro, starring Fernando Lamas and Rhonda Fleming. Actually, it's not. I've totally made that up just because I got the video recently. I went back into the crate of shame, which, as everybody knows, is the crate full of DVDs and Blu-rays of movies that I should have watched by now, that are usually quality movies, but that I haven't got around to for whatever reason. So they're all movies that I haven't seen before, and they're movies that I should have seen. So what I do is I reach in, grab two at random, and review them on the channel. And now I'll play you the B-roll of me doing exactly that. By the way, this is the kitten Luna. She's the one making all of the extraneous noise. And now the kitten has gone totally manic. Anyway, let's move along. We'll try to get through this. The first movie is from 2010. It was written by Aaron Sorkin. People know him from The West Wing, amongst other things. And directed by David Fincher. And it is The Social Network, starring Jesse Eisenberg, Andrew Garfield, Justin Timberlake, Armie Hammer, and a bunch of other people. So there's that. First time I've done a David Fincher movie, and that's actually it's the second time I've done a David Fincher movie. The first one being Mank, and that kitten is very distracting. So I was looking forward to seeing this. I picked it up really cheaply at cash converters, and so getting a Blu-ray, which has also got a digital copy and a DVD copy. I kind of like movies that give you a DVD and a Blu-ray for the simple reason that if one of them gets any bit right or has any problems with it, you got the other one to watch, so it's not a total loss. So that's the first one. Second one is from 1960, a bit of a hidden gem and a bit of a rare bird. It was put out by Indicator, which means it's probably going to be good. Actually, it is. And it is Psyche 59, directed by Alexander Singer, starring Patricia, Neal, Curt, Jurgens, Samantha Eggar, and Ian Bannett. It's basically a four-hander, and it's really interesting. It's got a whole bunch of extras on it, including an interview with Samantha Eggar, who's now, according to Wikipedia, 82 years old. But in this one, she is not 82 years old. So let's get on with the show. Before I do, I'll do the usual stuff. I'll get this out of the way so we can talk about movies. If you'd like to, please consider subscribing to the channel, throwing in a like, leave me a comment and tell me what will be in your crate of shame if you had a crate of shame to put movies into. There are always movies that you know are good, but you've never got around to watching, and they're a fascinating thing. By the way, while the kitten is going manic, I have fixed up the library area, the movie library area. I had a whole stacks of videos that went on shelves. I went in alphabetical order. I kind of do my movies three ways. The first one are the TV series, which I just pile into one of the shelves over here. I'll show you them at a future time. And then I've got the box sets, which I put there. Helps if you can see the finger. And then around that wall and the back wall are all of the movies A to Z. I don't separate them into DVDs and Blu-rays. That would then get complicated, and I don't want to complicate my life any more than they absolutely have to. So the last 3 days, while kitten wrangling, I have been putting everything on a shelf. The only things that aren't on a shelf, apart from that cat, are the ones that are in the crate of shame. But I've left space for them. I've actually got a little bit of expansion space, which surprised the hell out of me. But I do. So let's do these in reverse chronological order. First off, The Social Network. As I said, it was written by Aaron Sorkin, directed by David Fincher, and it tells the story about the genesis of Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg at Harvard University, his problems with other people at the university, the weird social structures of Harvard, and the way that privilege turns it into a very alien culture to what most of us know. And I found myself hating almost every character in this movie for that reason. They were all privileged assholes, and that kind of makes it interesting as well as making it repugnant in several ways. So the story starts out with Mark Zuckerberg, who's a computer genius. He breaking up with his girlfriend. He's probably one of the worst boyfriends in recent movie history. And he desires to get revenge by starting a website called Face Mash, by getting all of the pictures of all of the girls in the different colleges of Harvard University and letting people judge them by their attractiveness. This gets him into a lot of trouble, as it bloody well should have. And so he starts from that idea of getting people involved and interacting socially through the medium of the internet, and it eventually rolls into a college-based Facebook called The Facebook at the time, which then expands to other colleges and becomes the juggernaut that we all know and have very ambivalent feelings about. Zuckerberg and his cronies, including Eduardo Saverin, these are all real people, so I'm not going to say too much bad about them because they're litigious bastards as well, as one of the main plots of the movie gives us. And the Winklevoss twins, played by Armie Hammer. Now, a movie with twin Armie Hammers in it doesn't play as well in 2021 as it did in 2010. But he's okay as very privileged twins who have this idea of making a dating app for Harvard University. They then get Zuckerberg on board, but he's kind of not particularly interested and doesn't do any work on it. And when he becomes famous, both the Winklevoss twins and Eduardo Saverin, played by Andrew Garfield, sue Mark Zuckerberg. And the framing of this movie is the depositions of both of those lawsuits and the way that Zuckerberg is very disdainful of the people who are suing him and the legal people who are carrying out the suit on behalf of these privileged gentlemen. Along the way, Zuckerberg meets Sean Parker, played by Justin Timberlake, and he's pretty good in this, who was the guy who created Napster back in the day as a music sharing site, and who later went on to have some influence on things like Spotify. With Parker as something of a mentor to him, he drops the from the Facebook and gets the impetus and gets the real-world knowledge that he needs to create Facebook and to expand it first to other universities, and then, of course, to pretty much half the people on this clay and granite planet in 2021. Now, the Mark Zuckerberg that Jesse Eisenberg gives us in this movie is very different from the one that you see in Senate committees. That Zuckerberg is a little more like H.P. Lovecraft than he is actually like Jesse Eisenberg. But Jesse Eisenberg is pretty good. He's got the fast patter down pat. The computer language is all pretty accurate, and the idea that the world has changed so much with the inception of Facebook and the way we interact with each other is so very different because of it, is explored up until 2010, of course. And there have been a lot of changes to Facebook since 2010. Now, giving all of this complex story in a movie is kind of difficult. There's a lot of information to convey. There's a lot of information about the culture of Harvard University, which I find incredibly toxic, and about the way that startups in the early 2000s were created and how angel investors helped them out and how people were looking for the next big thing. And the weird thing about this is it came from an outsider, but it came from an outsider inside a nest of privilege. And the fact that Eduardo Saverin was willing to lend Zuckerberg $1,000 to buy the servers he needed to start the site. And again, he gave him $18,000 afterwards when he went to California to increase the breadth of Facebook. All of this, isn't something that just anybody can access. But Sorkin and Fincher give us that world in a really interesting way. There's kind of looking at it the way you would a theoretical Martian culture in some ways. It's about a culture that's very alien to us, but has had a profound influence over the world in the time since about 2003, 2004, when Zuckerberg launched Facebook on the first a small scale and then on a much larger scale as well. And Fincher is the man to do it. He gives the movie a great look. He gives us the privileged areas of Harvard University. He gives us the crazy areas of Silicon Valley in several ways. He gives us drinking competitions combined with hacking competitions as a way of recruiting people for Facebook, which is something I believe that actually happened. And he gives us a really bravura scene where the Winklevoss twins, who are rowers, they're in rowing competitions, sculling, and he gives us the Winklevoss twins as a part of a team at the Henley Regatta in England. And he does something really interesting as he directs that part. He uses really shallow depth of field all through those scenes in the movie. I think it's a little way of him saying how shallow the Winklevoss twins are by using shallow depth of field. So by using a cinematographer's trick, he actually conveys something about the nature of the people on screen. And I really liked that. When I realized what he was doing, I was so chuffed about it and delighted by the fact he had the audacity to do that. This is a good movie. It gives us modern history in a context that's understandable. There are obviously shortcuts taken because the complexity of a new startup and Facebook being created. It's a story that's difficult to put into a 2.5 hour movie. There's just so much information packed into it. There's so much cultural change. There's so much really icky stuff that goes on. And so cramming it into a movie is something only people like Aaron Sorkin and David Fincher could do. None of the people in this movie are admirable. If they're admirable at all, I suppose, they're admirable in their creative genius, which only some of the people on screen have. And the movie conveys both the kind of audacity and the forward thinking of the culture of startup people, particularly around Harvard University in 2003. And the movie conveys that complexity really interestingly and gives us winners and losers, characters who prevail and characters who are ridiculed. And it gives us a softened version, I think, of Mark Zuckerberg, because I don't believe he was as portrayed in the movie, based on his subsequent actions and the way he has handled the upscaling of Facebook to the enormous monolith it is now. Maybe either he was misjudged by Aaron Sorkin and David Fincher, or they decided they didn't want to get into a lawsuit with him. But it's still an admirable movie. It's still an important part of our recent cultural history. And you should check out The Social Network. So that moves us on to Psyche 59, which is a psychological drama, as the name indicates a bit. The title is actually about a trauma that happens to the main character, Alison, played by Patricia Neal, in 1959. She gets a form of kind of sort of hysterical blindness. Though not necessarily hysterical blindness, her brain doesn't register the images that her eyes send down the optic nerve. And so she's been blind for a while. She's had a child, and one of her children she's never seen because the blindness occurred while she was pregnant with the child. She's married to a guy called Eric, played by Curt Jurgens, who is a slimy bastard. Let's just put it that way. It's the simplest way to describe him. He goes on business trips, and he's very kind of hands-on and sexual and erotic to her. And he comes back from a business trip. Meanwhile, her sister Robin, played by Samantha Eggar, has divorced her husband in America and come back to England. There's a kind of fourth wheel, played by Ian Bannon, who's a man who kind of escorts Alison around when Eric is on business trips, and they kind of have a flirtatious relationship. Now, what Alison doesn't know is that when her younger sister, Robin, was a teenager, her husband seduced her, though she was 17 at the time, so it could be considered rape in modern terms. And so there's a dynamic happening between the four characters about which the kind of focal character, Alison, is unaware of a lot of, because a lot of it's in gestures and people touching each other's hands and look. So the movie progresses through this weird dance that the four characters do with one another. Alison and Eric have two daughters as well, and they all go for their summer holidays in a cottage in the country where her mother lives. And her mother's very into tarot cards and astrology, and is a really interesting character in her own right, and kind of sees what's going on in the background. Now, this one was based on a French novel, which makes it a complicated movie for an American company, Columbia, to make in England, with an American director, Alexander Singer. Columbia and other studios did this a lot in Europe in the 50s and 60s particularly. They would make profits in these countries and weren't able to offshore the profits because the countries said, no, you can't take these profits out of the country. So the movie studios would invest in productions in those countries, sometimes using imported American actors, and then they'd show the movies in America and make profits from them that way. So it's a kind of complicated legal thing. But that's why you see a lot of American production companies in the 50s and 60s making films in Europe and the UK when they could very well be just making them in America. Now, I like Alexander Singer as a director. This movie's in beautiful widescreen black and white. And he made another movie about a stripper who has a relationship with a teenage boy. A movie called A Cold Wind in August with Lola Albright, which I saw at a very impressionable age. And I liked a lot. It's another hidden gem of a movie, more so even than Psyche 59. I've really got to add A Cold Wind in August to the list of movies I'm going to do as a hidden gem for the channel. It really is great. Now, what's so good about this movie? Now, it was based, I'm going to read this out because I'll get the name wrong for sure. It was based on a novel by Françoise de Ligneres, a French author, and it's got a very French feel to it. It's got that kind of not exactly acceptance of infidelity, but awareness that it occurs and the damage it can cause to people. And the movie, and this is a slight spoiler, but you can kind of guess it based on the premise. The movie takes some interesting and not predictable turns. While they're on holiday at this cottage by the sea, Alison loses her blindness. She falls off a horse, has another blow to the head, and that destroys whatever's blocking her brain from getting the signals from her optic nerve. And that's when things take an interesting turn in the third act. Now, I'm not going to spoil it. It doesn't go the way you expect it to. And it kind of does demonstrate the shallowness, weakness, and fear of several characters in this movie. I really like it for that. And it's got a very satisfying ending that plays really interestingly to a 21st century audience, where, for us at least, it seems the perfect ending for this film. I consider this one a hidden gem. I really enjoyed it much more than I thought I would. I don't think it's a perfect movie in any way. I think Samantha Eggar as the flirtatious Robin is fantastic and showing, in a way, the vanity of youth. And she has some scenes where she's wearing a bra and panties and admiring herself in a mirror, which is kind of audacious for the very early 60s, but it kind of tells us who this character is. Ian Bannon, who plays a character who's not particularly bright, but he's personable and amiable, and he admires both women. And then you've got Eric, played by Curt Jurgens, who is a kind of depraved monster in so many different ways in this movie. It really is a kind of psychodrama in a lot of ways, but you should check it out if you're interested in that kind of film, because it does have a lot going for it. And Alexander Singer's direction gives us some beautiful scenes as well. He really did know how to frame a shot wonderfully. He had a long career. He only made about 4 feature films, but he did a lot of episodic television as well, as many directors did who didn't really hit it big in Hollywood. In fact, his last gig was making an episode of Star Trek Voyager in the 1990s. But if you get a chance to, Psyche 59 is a kind of soft recommend for me. If you like a certain kind of movie, you'll like this. And it does have a very 1960s feel with some hidden depths that kind of sneak up on you. It's not a movie that blasts everything at you really fast the way The Social Network does, but it pays rewards to close attention. So anyway, that's it for this time around. By the way, if you want me to review Hivaro in 3D starring Fernanda Lamas, Rhonda Fleming and Brian Keith, I'm happy to do that. Let me know if you want to see this one. I just threw it in as a joke at the start of the video. But anyway, thank you very much for watching. As always, get the jab. Watch some good movies. Watch some bad movies. Pick a movie at random out of a box. And I'll catch you next time.